communication here. And then as soon as you get to the central nervous system is the main. If you have a kind of a, I don't know, a stand-at-home computer, not a laptop or something, but you had the CPU, the old box type of thing, and then you had a keyboard, and you had a monitor, so you had three parts. Okay, you put your information in, it had to go through this CPU, this processing unit here, and then it displayed something on a screen. All of that is done on our laptops today, where you consider the keyboard and all of that stuff that goes on inside where the keyboard is there, and then you have whatever you're doing there, you're putting it in, and it comes up on the screen. So here is this integrative center. We have information that goes in, and we have information that comes out, okay? Now, here's the peripheral nervous system, PNS, the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. So we talked about cranial nerves already? Yeah, we only have one batch of 3 to go yet, okay? One batch of 3 cranial nerves to go through the pericranial nerves. Now, here is really an important first bust out on this. The peripheral nervous system has a sensory or afferent. Get real comfortable with that term afferent. I don't know why they had to put that in. Why couldn't we just call it sensory going up, okay? And then we have motor efferent, almost like exiting, okay, efferent and efferent. And so this motor division, if you notice, now gets busted out into a whole bunch of additional steps. So here's our sensory afferent. What does it sound like? Sensory means what? Getting a lot of input. You have visual sensations come in, tactile sensations. You can tell hot, cold, hard, soft, sharp, dull when you put your hand on the table. Okay, you're sensing the temperature of the room, the light in the room, all kinds of other values. You're getting color input that's coming into you. Somatic and visceral sensory nerve fibers. Somatic. What did I tell you have to think about when you hear visceral? Anybody remember that from the last 20 minutes or an hour ago? Visceral, gut. Okay, so you're going to get information from your gut. What is your gut telling you? Dang, I'm hungry right now. Oh no, I'm full right now. Man, I never go to the bathroom here real quick. You know, you're getting input, sensory input from the gut, inside, internal. But then we have somatic. So the somatic is going to toss a few things out here. You know, we're going to talk about the soma, the rest of this, visceral, the gut. But those are all sending information. This is all sensory. It's sending information. And what are you going to do with that information, Bucky? What are you going to do with that information, Bucky? What are you going to do with that information? It's giving all of this information. And we're going to have a part of this nerve system that has to process all that stuff. And it's called the thalamus, Thalamus, the thalamus. And the thalamus is like your little screen. And it's constantly having to do this. Important, important, not important, not important, not important, not important, 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 not important, not important, important. Do you understand what I'm talking about? The thalamus is kind of your regulator for what is allowed to get up there that we're going to have to act on. Okay, so then you get over here to the motor. What does motor mean? Movement. Do this. Do this. Do this. Okay? Motor nerve fibers conduct impulses from here to the effectors. What are the effectors we're talking about? Could be the muscles, could be skeletal, could be cardiac, could be smooth, okay? Now, here we get to another division. We've already broken out central to peripheral. Peripheral, we have sensory and motor. It would really be a good idea if you took this chart that you have in front of you, that other one that I have there, and kind of do this a few times. Pencil it out a number of times, so that it makes some sense to you where you talk about sensory and motor, and then you get to the motor. You have the somatic motor, which is voluntary. What does that mean when you hear voluntary? I'm controlling it. I'm going to say, I want to do this. I want to pick up my hand, I want to scratch my head, I want to lift my foot, I want to do that. Okay, it's voluntary. Conduct impulses from the central nerve system, from here, goes through motor to the soma, and it says, to the skeletal muscles. The somatic, when you hear somatic, think muscle, skeletal, dominantly skeletal muscle. Then you jump over here, and here's the second under the motor. We have soma here, and we have autonomic here. You already know a little bit about the autonomic, just a little bit here. Visceral motor. Viscera, gut. Okay? Gut. And what's it mean here? It says it's involuntary, which means that if I give you a piece of apple right now, how far do you have to think about it? You're going to put it in your mouth, and that's pretty well the end of it, right? Man, that was tasty. No, that was kind of one of those mushy apples. Don't do that again. And after that, where's it going? Your digestive system is going to continue to process that regardless of your continued thought process about it, okay? It's going to go ahead, mush it around, move it in, do whatever it has to do, what magic, and then the only other time you have to think about it is, it'd be a good time to get rid of that stuff. Head for the toilet, okay? All right, so conduct impulses, again, from here, command center, cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, and glands. Cardiac, smooth, and glands. What about skeletal muscles? Which is cardiac muscles, smooth. Where's the skeleton? Oh, they're over here. You understand? Motor control. This motor control for the soma is taking care of the skeletal muscles. This motor control over here is autonomic. Fight, flight, or fright, rest and digest. Fight, flight, or fright, rest and digest. Fight, flight, or fright, rest and digest. Okay? When you get over here, it's cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, and glands. You get down here to the sympathetic division, and here's the parasympathetic division, or two. Fight, flight, or fright. Mobilizes the body system during activity. E-events, exercise, embarrassment. Okay? Some type of activity that you're doing. You decide you're going to go out for a run, you're on sympathetic mode right over here. You decide you just had a meal and you better camp out and make that food have this opportunity to digest, so I turn on the football game, you're going to be over here and rest and digest, okay? You might jump into this if, oh, yeah, they got it! Okay. You decide to jump into the game, be part of the excitement of the game. Promotes housekeeping functions during rest. Conserves energy, rest and digest, fight, flight, or fright. Are we making any sense here? All right, introduction. Two main cell types in the nervous system. We have neurons and we have glial cells. Neurons are the workhorses. Glial cells, neurons are the ones that actually communicate the signaling. The glial cells are the housekeepers. They're the nursemaids of the entire system here. The nerve, the bundle of axons. Please get real comfortable with this. Axon. Get real comfortable with the term axon. So a nerve is a bundle of these axons. These nerve cells that are going to be the axon. Outside the brain and the spinal cord. When we talk about a nerve, they're outside of the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. The cranial nerves. Have we talked about those? How many pair? 12. How many have we talked about so far? 9 of the 12 pair, correct? We've gone over 9 of them. Originate from the brain, 12 pairs. The spinal nerves. Now, when you talk about those exiting through the intervertebral foramen, does that term sound familiar at all? Intervertebral foramen. Extending out here, these are the spinal nerves here that we're going to have. Originate from the spinal cord. There's 31 pair of those. Why pair? Because you got those on the right and those on the left. The ganglion. The ganglion is a collection of neuron cell bodies outside the brain and spinal cord. One of the ganglion we talk about is the ganglion empire. If you've ever had an opportunity to just take a real slamming hard impact where you fall down on your keister right there and you hit that coccyx right on the inside by the coccyx there's called ganglion empire. And it's a major network of nerves there. And anybody who's ever fallen like that and crushed that just has persistent problems with sitting usually, because it's just a real sensitive knot of neural tissue right there called the ganglion. We talk about plexus also, a nerve plexus, an extensive network of, here again, those axons. Sometimes neuron cell bodies located, again, this is outside of this. And now here are the glial cells. You're going to have to learn the glial cells. There are 6 of them. We'll get to the individual ones here. All right, supportive cells with many functions. We're actually going to identify the different ones we have there. All right, so why do we have a nerve system? There should be, well, that's obvious, I need it. Okay, why do you need it? Well, maintaining homeostasis. We've addressed that numerous times, the ability to regulate that environment of the body here, regulate and coordinate activities to maintain our balance, receive sensory input, monitor the internal and external stimuli. Internal stimuli are telling you what's going on inside. Hungry. Got to get rid of waste. Thirsty. Okay, some things like that. Integrating information. The brain and the spinal cord process here's our sensory, the stuff that comes in, and initiate a motor response, initiate some kind of response. Sensory input, motor output. Controlling muscles and glands. That sounds like an important component of this. Establishing and maintaining our mental activity. Hopefully that's going on. Okay, consciousness, alert, awake, thinking, memory. Hope this is working today. Got a lot of stuff going on here. All right, we're going to go on from the nervous system. Information flow. Sensory division of the peripheral nerve system. We get information that comes, we got little arrows going in here, sensory receptors, input, light, sound, taste, smell, touch, temperature, pain, pressure, all those are receptors. You know, you think you've got a lot of little receptors on the outside of our new cars, let you know the car's over here, the one behind you, too close to the car in front of you, you know, water hit your windshield, you know, all those the different sensors we have. Nothing compared to what your body has. The sophistication we have here. And then we have the motor division. Here's a somatic that's going to go just to the skeletal muscle. Soma, skeletal, soma, skeletal, soma, skeletal, okay? Lock that in someplace, okay? And then we have autonomic, sympathetic, and parasympathetic, and that's going to be, okay? The effectors are cardiac, smooth muscles, and the glands here. All right, divisions of the peripheral nerve system. Sensory afferent. Are we good at that? Sensory afferent. That's information going which way? To the brain. Up to the brain. It's, you know, it's kind of, it'd be nice if we just say, it's doing this, it's going up. But we also have sensory receptors on the skull and the cranial area here that are sending information to the brain too. So they're sending information in from all kinds of directions on your head area here. But generally speaking, if you're coming from the great toes all the way up to the body here, it's going this direction. Okay, it's coming up. Toward, we're always going toward the central nervous system with our sensory input, our afferent. The sensory receptors can be neuron endings or specialized cells, send impulses along nerves. Where are they going to go? To the brain or the spinal cord, and usually by way of the spinal cord to the brain. Motor efferent. Transmit action potentials, yeah, there's that term again, an action potential, from the CNS to maybe muscles or glands, okay? Sensory. All right, here's a memory aid. Sensory afferent, motor efferent. It's real easy if you think in terms of it's always going to be this type of thing. Lock this in someplace. S, A, E. You good with that? It's the same. What does same mean? Sensory afferent, motor efferent. Sensory afferent, motor efferent. Afferent means it's going to the brain and spinal cord. Spinal cord and brain usually is the way it has to be transmitted. And the motor efferent from the central nervous system to muscles or the glands. Okay, so here is a real simple diagram of what you have on that paper there. There's a whole lot of verbiage on here that's, you know, getting you a little bit different than what we have here, but this is one that's real important to understand. Lock it in, then make some sense. The motor division, somatic nerve system. Soma. Soma making reference to what? Dominantly
skeletal muscle.
Okay? From the CNS to the skeletal muscle. The somatic nerve system from the central nerve system to the skeletal muscle. Voluntary. Now we go to the top of the page here on the back side of this where you see this drawing on the top of this, and we're going to be right on the top. All it is the top portion of that illustration I did today. Voluntary single neuron system. Voluntary. You good at that? Yeah, it's the one that you have command and control over. Somatic nerve system. Motor division appears. The autonomic nerve system gets a whole lot more complex here. From the CNS to the smooth muscles, the cardiac muscles, and certain glands. No reference to skeletal muscle in this, okay? This is going to be the autonomic nerve system from the central nerve system, the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. It's subconscious, or we say it's involuntary, it's under automatic control. It's part of autonomic. Autonomic, some people consider autonomic, well, that's kind of like automatic. I don't have to think about it. It's going to take care of business without my conscious input. Two neuron system. First, from the central nervous system to the ganglia. So now we're looking at the second part of the chart that I have on that page, that handout that you had, and we're talking about a two neuron system. We have the first component of it, and then we have the second part of it. The first is from the central nervous system to a ganglion. Okay? We're going to do a ganglion. And then from the second, from the ganglion to an effector. And we're generally going to have a neurotransmitter in there. Okay, divisions. The sympathetic. You should know something about sympathetic. Fight, flight, or fright. Rest and digest. Okay, first is sympathetic. Prepares the body for physical activity. Okay, really important to consider that. I gave you a sheet on sympathetic, parasympathetic, a handout earlier. I want to look at that one. Parasympathetic regulates the resting functions such as digesting food, emptying the urinary bladder, okay, things like that. Don't have to think about it here. Enteric. There's a third component of this that we oftentimes link in, but these are the dominant divisions that you need to know, sympathetic, parasympathetic. These are plexes. Remember, plexes are large networks that take place here within the walls of the digestive tract. They're nerve plexes that fall into the area of the autonomic nerve system. But generally speaking, we talk almost exclusively of these two right here. Hey, that should look real familiar. Dendrites, cell body, axon. Dendrites, cell body, axon. Okay, and you notice that the impulse direction they're showing here is going this way. We go to the axon terminals, and these can be in contact with another neuron, with a muscle, a gland, or some other structure here. Here's the dendrites. These are like the antenna. Okay, we good at this? Don't want to leave anybody dirt on here because I want you to understand. There's the dendritic ends here. And then there's the biosynthetic center of the information. Information comes in, it gets processed here, and it gets sent out here. And we're talking about having an action potential that's going to be passed along this area here. There's a few features. These are those myelin sheaths I made reference to, heavily myelinated or lightly myelinated. We talked about when I introduced that handout. These are heavily myelinated in this particular instance right here. And these particular little areas of myelin are known as Schwann cells. Please nail that term down someplace, Schwann cells. Okay, so neuron. This is the cells of the nervous system, the neurons. The neurons are what? They're electrically excitable cells of the nerve system. Okay, the neurons. So an electrically excitable cell. Remember, we have to have some kind of a stimulation in order to have a muscle do something, or a gland to do something. It has to be a stimulation. Okay. So what we're dealing with is there's three major parts to this neuron. First is the cell body, or what is also referred to as the soma. We're generally going to, in this class, we're going to talk about is the nerve cell body. Okay. Typically, cell functions as functions such as protein synthesis and housekeeping. What does this mean, protein synthesis? Help me out with that. What are we talking about when we say protein synthesis?
Making proteins.
Building proteins. What do you need to have to build a protein? Amino. That's good. So fast too. Amino acids. And housekeeping. They contain what are called rough endoplasmic reticulum nesal bodies. I never remember having that in the test, so okay, it's nice to know. Gee whiz stuff. All right, so here's the nucleus. Here's the soma or the cell body. Here's the dendrite cell body. Here's the axon. The neuron. Electrically excitable cells, three major parts. The second part is the dendrites. Actually, I like to think it's the first part of it because it's where the information comes in. Okay, but the text authors think, well, we should talk about the cell body first. Okay, fine. These are the extensions of the cell body that receive, like antenna, okay? Antenna that receive the information from other neurons or sensory receptors. They're short, they're often highly branched, with extensions called dendritic spines. When you see this illustration, you know, these little spiny things, multiple branching on it, short little ends on these. But it's bringing the material in to here, dendritic spines. They conduct, notice, they conduct currents toward the cell body. They're bringing information to the cell body. So they should be number one. And then we go to the cell body, okay? Is there a third part? Third part would be what?
Axon.
The axon. Three major parts, here's the axons. The neuron is the electrical excitable cell associated with the nerve system, okay? Third part is going to be the axons. Arise from the axon hillock. The hillock is that little like peak extension there of the cell body, and then becomes, whatever, part of the triggering zone where, and here's the term that's going to be real important, we're going to conduct action potentials, APs. Action potentials are going to be conducted down the axon, originating from information from the dendrites processed within the cell body, and then the action potential is going to go down the axon. Ends at the presynaptic terminal. Are we good with something called the presynaptic? Something before the contact with the next step in here, presynapse, before the synapse. And then the end point here, this presynaptic terminal, has some little vesicles there, right? We call them synaptic vesicles. What could a synaptic vesicle possibly be filled with? Neurotransmitter. And if we're talking about in the somatic nerve system, what's the neurotransmitter going to be? Acetylcholine. If we're talking about the autonomic nerve system, what is the synaptic vesicle going to possibly contain? Norepinephrine or acetylcholine. It can have either one of those. It'll be acetylcholine. So, what have we done so far? We bring a signal in here, it gets processed here, an action potential, if there's associated depolarization takes place. Here's that axon hillock, travels down this area here. These are the presynaptic ends. They're going to be something that these have to communicate with at a synapse, postsynaptic, presynaptic, right in the ends right here are going to be those vesicles that are going to contain the neurotransmitter. If it's the somatic nerve system, it's acetylcholine. If it's the autonomic nerve system, it's norepinephrine, or it could be acetylcholine. All right, the structural units of the nerve system. Large, highly specialized cells that conduct impulses. We're still talking about the neurons, okay? Extreme longevity. This is kind of a nice idea because it's suggested that if you lose neurons, they're gone. There's no regenerative capability, okay? What does it mean when we say amitotic? What? Amitotic. They're not capable of having, they're not going to replicate. They can't reproduce this. They're amitotic. With few exceptions, if you destroy neurons, none. Have you ever heard about people going to the Electronon Flexicon Society and they say, well, I destroyed a few neurons last night. You did, Anthony? You heard that? You participated? No, not you. Highly metabolic rate. Here, the neurons are highly metabolic. They have a high metabolic, what does that mean? They're busy, okay? They do an awful lot of metabolic processing of nutrients require a continuous supply of oxygen and glucose. You hear about people every now and then, they say, well, they're brain dead. Okay, maybe as a result of some kind of a compromise to the vascular supply to the brain there. Oxygen and glucose. Dang, that's interesting. Those two? Huh, oxygen and glucose. All have cell body and one or more processes. All have a cell body. Probably could put a cell body. Okay, dendrite, cell body, axon. Okay? Hey, that's what it looks like. Or it could look like this. This is always amazing. This is probably one of the best photomicrographs of a neuron that you generally don't get them where they look like, hey, that really looks like that axon hillock, and these look like the dendritic ends going out, and here is the axon going on down, and here is the terminal end here. Look at that. There's a motor unit right here. We've got the presynaptic, postsynaptic, this on a skeletal muscle here, the neurotransmitter going to be released from those vesicles right there. Dang, that's a nice illustration. And it's not even an artist's concept. This is actual photomicrograph of an electron microscopy here. There's 250 times here, whatever that makes here. And so we see this neuron cell body, dendritic ends, cell body, axon, highly myelinated, terminal ends. There's a term that's being brought up every now and then. They say Schwann cell, Neuron VA. Schwann cell, Schwann cell, Schwann cell, Schwann cell, Neuron VA. This little gap junction right here is real significant because the axon looks like little sausages. You know that little dog biscuit thing where you got stuff on the outside and little things sticking out on there. All right, pig in a blanket. Anybody do that? Bread, round, dog, hot dog, okay. Little hot dog sticking out, but you got a little gap in here. That's called the node of Ron VA. That's really an important gap junction because we talk about saltatory conduction. The way this communicates is that there's a jumping effect. It doesn't pass along the surface. It jumps from here to here. The more myelinated it is, the more rapid the communication can take place. The less myelinated, the slower the communication. Axonic transport mechanism. Axonic, something about the axon. Axoplasm moves cytoskeleton proteins, mitochondria, and synaptic vesicles from the cell body toward the terminals. Okay, anterograde, supply for growth, repair, and renewal here. Okay, that's great. Movements toward the cell body is retrograde. If things are going in the opposite direction, this is anterograde, this is retrograde. That's highly unlikely type of thing that takes place. Damaged organelles include damaged organelles, recycloplasm membrane, and substance taken in by endocytosis. Oftentimes we consider that that can be problematic when it goes retrograde, goes back. And here's the reason why. Rabies and herpes virus. Rabies and herpes virus can enter the axons and damage skin and transport to the central mechanism through this process of retrograde. It gets into there and it goes back field into the cell body. And so there's the big concern associated with a herpetic virus or even with a rabies. And so we get concerned about retrograde movement going into an axon and getting able to have access back to the cell body. All right, so remember we talked about structural and functional? There's an awful lot of that stuff that takes place, structural and functional. This is now making reference to the classification by the way in which these neurons function. What do they do? Direction of the action potential. We have sensory afferent. Are we good with that? SA? Sensory afferent? Okay, action potentials are going to go toward the central nerve system. We're going toward. Motor efferent, action potentials away from the central nerve system. Interneurons. Haven't discussed anything about something that's in between something here. Here's something that sensory afferent, motor efferent, but we also have something called interneurons. They actually happen to be within the central nerve system from one neuron to another. From one neuron to another, we sometimes talk in terms of something called an interneuron. Okay, sensory afferent, motor efferent. Okay, so based on the number of dendrites, here's the structural classifications that we want to take a look at. First of all, we're going to talk about a type called multipolar. Multi, just take into consideration that first part of it, multi. Most of the neurons in the central nervous system, did you get this? Once again, if someone asks you, what's the dominant type of structural neuron in the body there, you're going to say what? Or excuse me, functional, no, these are structural. Structural neurons you're going to have, what's the most common type? Multipolar, good. Bipolar, that usually is considered to be a term of homeostatic imbalance within an individual. It says, well, they're bipolar or something like that. Sensory in the retina of the eye and in the nasal cavity. The retina of the eye is our light to the world, our opportunity to see the rest of the world. The nasal cavity is when you're digging for gold and you're up there. What would that cranial nerve be? Which one is it?
Olfactory.
Olfactory, which is which one?
Number one.
Number one, yeah. Cranial nerve number one. So here we're going to have some bipolar, very exclusive area. They're going to be bipolar. They're real odd looking things, but they're going to be in the eye, where we're going to talk about its special senses at the end of the semester or sometime in February or March, I think. The rate we're going, come on. No. Before December, right?
I didn't catch
We're going to
that.
be in special senses. What?
Go ahead. No.
Ricky, the semester ends in December. December 10th, we're done here. We got to get this stuff taken care of before that.
See, there was
Okay.
like a little blank in between.
Yeah, I know. By February we'll be there, Ricky. The rate we're going. All right. Sensory neurons are found in the retina of the eye, very exclusive area for our visual capabilities here, and also the nasal cavity for our. And then we have pseudo-unipolar. What is, remember the term pseudo? We talked about pseudo-stratified. We said false sense of stratification. Well, here's pseudo-unipolar. Multipolar, bipolar, pseudo-unipolar, what the heck? Single process that divides in two branches, part that extends to the periphery as dendrite-like sensory receptors. Okay, and then we have axonic. So all of these different divisions, but what do you want to remember as multipolar? What kind of a neuron is it most likely going to be? Multipolar. Okay, no axons, only dendrites, found in the brain and the retina, where they only communicate using what are called graded potentials. More about that later. Axonic. So here's an artist's interpretation of what those are. Here's our multipolar. Dominant type we're going to find in the body. Dendrites, subbody, axon, little terminal ends on it. Here's the one that's found in the nasal cavity. That's going to be where we have the neurosensory olfactory area. We've got dendrites, subbody, axons. And then here's the one that's pseudo-unipolar. It's got this and I'll call all that. Okay. And then here you've got this one that's considered the axonic neuron. Multiple dendrites, no axons. Dendrite again. Processing here. Okay. I mentioned that there are neurons and there's neuroglia, or the glial cells. There's neurons and there's glial cells. Now you need to know these. The histology of nervous tissue, there's going to be 6 of these, okay? Pay close attention. You need to know the 6. You need to know the titles. They're going to be in the test here. The neuroglia. They're called glial cells by common reference. Neuroglial is the better term for them. I'll generally refer to them as neuroglial cells. All right, so what do you have? Astrocytes. Astrocytes. The CNS on the back here means what? Where are we going to find the astrocytes? Where are you going to find the astrocytes?
Brain of spinal cord.
In the central nerve system, okay? You good at that, Rosia? Oh, you did? Did you? Okay, I didn't hear it, I'm sorry. Astrocytes, what about these? More to be continued here, okay. Then we have ependymal cells. Kind of an odd name, but they're called ependymal cells. They're going to play a real important role when we get further into the information here of the nerve system here. We're going to have microglial cells. Micro kind of means small little glial cells. We're going to have oligodendrocytes. That's the biggest tongue twister of all of them. You need to know how to pronounce all of these. Where are these 4 found? Central nervous system. Woo, that was easy. Okay, they were found in the central nervous system. There's 2 more. We're going to have satellite cells, but they are going to be found where? In the peripheral nervous system. And we're going to have, I already talked about Schwann cells. Remember those? They're the cells that make up that myelin sheath material there, okay? and they too are found in the peripheral nervous system. So let's bust them out individually. Astrocytes. Star-shaped processes that form feet that cover the surface of the neurons. Look at these guys. Here's an astrocyte. Look at that. They wrap around. Here's a capillary in the area of the central nervous system. And the astrocytes, I mentioned before, the astrocytes are the nursemaids of the nervous system. And notice this, they're wrapping around, and they're also wrapping around here, so they're constantly taking care of the nervous system here from the standpoint of, look at this, they've got all kinds of information that's going on. Blood vessels, and the pia mater, and lots of